It's it's awesome to have you back, Jeff. I always enjoyed your first episode, so I'm glad that you're back.
No, thank
Um,
you.
I was gonna say, listening. I like the how you bring up how body count does not equal happiness. In fact, it equals unhappiness. And Liz, you made this comment, and I thought this was good too. Too much experience in this particular area is not a good thing, and can cause a lot of issues with bonding in relationships. Um, Now, something that really stuck out to me, and I wanted to ask more about this, Jeff, was you mentioned the disadvantage. You had a word for it, a term.
Disadvantaged children?
Yeah, I think so. Where you're talking about single moms versus single dads.
Yes, the term was that the study calls them disadvantaged children and
And
those who have only single moms as parents.
so, what is the? Is there a correlation why? It seems like the children of single fathers have less issues than the children of single mothers.
Yes. Well, for starters, you can think of yourself as a man and what is it that you bring to the table that's a little bit different. For most men, there's a level of discipline that they tend to have innately. And my own perspective is that children need lots of discipline. And there are moments when my wife and I might disagree what that discipline should look like, for
Yeah.
sure. But I know that even with my wife, there was while we were united on almost all of our parenting, there were differences in how we viewed consequences and the role of discipline and things like that. And I think we're in a society where consequences are rare. And so if consequences are rare, we're going to get more and more of the same behavior. And so I'm a believer in consequences for my son as a child and growing up. And so, he
It,
had, go
it
ahead.
sounds like men and women approach the idea of structure a little differently. I know that I think generally speaking, women are more interested in people and men are more interested in things, and that seems to kind of affect our how we view structures and discipline, like you said.
Yeah, perhaps so. I'm not an expert in this area. I only have my own experience in that. And, the data is very clear. And, we live in a data driven world. Everybody's following the data, and the data is every place. And the collection of this extensive data is rather surprisingly revealing about the shortfall that exist in being the child of a single mom home. And it's not in the best interest of children to be the children, to be in a home with just a single mom. And that's not to say there aren't plenty of single moms out there who are doing amazing jobs, because there's lots of them. But these are general rules that we're seeing in the data.
What
And there
advice? What
what's that?
advice would you have for single mothers though, who are trying their best and may not be able to identify what they need to do? Or is there anything you would recommend or suggest?
These are going to be individual circumstances.
Okay.
As a general rule of thumb, I would say the priority has to be the children. The priority has to be the well-being of the children. And so the emotional well-being, the social well-being, the psychological well-being, the physical well-being. And so that encompasses a whole bunch of stuff. Uh, I live in the world of not evaluating things, whether this is right or wrong or good and bad. I just want to know, is this supportive to this child? Is this helpful or beneficial to this child? Is my behavior supporting them being the best version of themselves possible? And so I need to model things that are going to help this young person elevate their life. That's my goal. That's my role as an adult, to try to elevate the experience of this child in a way that's going to support their own happiness and their own well-being.
I think that's well said and very, very true. Is just trying to stay centered and focused on what's best for the child. Um, do you have any like resources that you could point people to, or something we could add in the links to help?
There's people who are a lot smarter than me out there who've written plenty of books on parenting, for sure. One of the real quickly, I was a confidence coach initially when I left Wall Street for, I think, the first 3 years of my coaching career. I just worked with teens because I was tired of the business people. And I got teens who committed lots of self-harm, and suicidal teens, and cutters and burners, and severely depressed teens. And I learned a great deal that primarily every teen that I worked with was either from a broken home or a dysfunctional household. I didn't see any happy teens who came from those homes at all. The other thing that I learned quickly was that parents were resistant to hearing the truth. Let's just use a simple thing like affection. We talked about hugs earlier. We can talk about hugs with children and the impact of hugs on children. And so I remember one young boy who was 11 at the time saying to me in front of his mom, "I really need more hugs from you, Mom." And she immediately became defensive and said, "I give you hugs. What are you talking about?" And so the credibility of a child's view of the world is often disrupted by our own individual versions of the world. And we need to be able to accept that our child's version of the world is very real for them. And while ours might be different, they're not living in our world. They're living in their own. And so if we can't identify with what their reality of the world that they view is through their eyes, we're going to fall short.
Yeah, that's wow. That just makes me think. Yeah, it's some people. It's difficult to view their children as actual individuals and little people too that need certain things, and just being empathetic, like you're saying, rather than invalidating, like responding with validation and saying, "Oh my gosh, you need more hugs. I'll try and do that."
I found as a general theme, kids need a lot more emotional support than you might think. It looks like they're doing great. No, in my own experience with my own son, that was true as well. I found that he needed more emotional support than I realized. It's very easy to overlook that.
I think as a man, I can relate to that too, because my sons, I'm like, what do you need? Why do you need that? Rather than just taking a step back. Okay, this is what they need, and just being more focused on that, and not defensive, like you said, other parents might respond. I've heard, and I feel like this is a correlation, that neglect is worse than abuse for kids. Is that true?
Yes, I have also seen studies that indicate that neglect is worse than negative consequences. If you're going to beat your child versus positively praise them, etc., versus completely ignore them, that would be the worst.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Let me see. I had a question here.
I'm kind of curious while you're looking there, Jeff. What would emotional support look like? Sound like? Kids don't really want to be pummeled with questions, right? So
this is the beauty of trying to figure out how to be a great parent. I remember Chloe Madonis, who you probably both may know and certainly have heard of, saying that there is no one parenting style that works for every child. And I remembered that, and I got lots of advice from lots of people before my son was born about how to be a good parent. And ultimately, you kind of have to figure out your children. They're each going to have certain individual needs, and how to kind of cater to what it is that helps them the most. What is most supportive to this person over this child? What's most beneficial for their well-being over this particular child? And to be able to do that in a balancing way that doesn't look like you're supporting this person more, so you create envy and bad feelings of resentment and things like that. It's a juggling act, and being a parent is certainly an evolving role. And I viewed it simply as a work in progress, and I still to this day view it as a work in progress. I just hope to get a little better tomorrow than I was today. And I try to use my own screw ups and mistakes and experience as a learning curve, so that I don't repeat the mistakes that I've made in the past.
I had a friend who recommended, I thought this was kind of brilliant and so simple at the same time, that like you go to a pizza restaurant, and on the pizza on the table is a card that says, how did we do? How was the pizza? How was the service?
Sure.
Did you feel this? Did you feel that? Try that. Check in with your kid. how are you doing today?
Yeah.
Am I a good parent? Am I meeting your needs? Is there something, And I thought, man, that's so simple. And yet we just glossed right over something like that. But that's something that I would recommend trying with your kid. What do you think, Jeff?
I'm open to trying anything. There's a great balancing act for parents today. And I understand that many parents want to be their child's friend first. And I can relate to that. I also know that if I'm my child's friend only, then I am letting them down in lots of different ways in terms of the guidance that they need. And, we go from kids, we all do, and growing up, we go from parental influence to peer influence. And the longer I can prevent my child from going to peer influence is always going to be in their best interest. There's not anybody out there who's going to give my son the guidance that's in his best interest more than I am. His buddies aren't. His girlfriend's not. He's not going to get information that's relevant to his well-being from any of his buddies. And that's just the reality. And he knows this. We've talked about it. We've talked about the importance of making sure that his friendships are revealed for what they are, that his job is to be a filter of people and to recognize who's trustworthy, who's not, who's really a friend, who's a superficial friend, to know the truthfulness of what these people are revealing to him and to identify the evidence and the proof that they provide, and to not ignore it and to not pretend that this person is the person I think they are when they have revealed that they are not.
Yeah, I think motives, your parents are going to have different motives than your friends completely. And the relationship dynamics are completely different too. And I agree with you that a lot of people will just want to just be a friend rather than like, no, I'm like the structure and the authority in your life, and I'm here to help and guide you to the right place. And I love and care about you more than anything and anybody else will.
Yeah. And that's really the thing. My understanding early on was that kids needed more than anything to know that they're loved unconditionally, that it's not conditional love, that if they do or behave this certain way, they can be loved even when they screw up. And I told my son many times that, and this kind of was a revealing thing. He said to me one day, I gave him a consequence about something. He said, "Why don't you love me?" And so my first reaction is, what are you talking about? Why don't I love you? And then I went and had to explain to him that even if I was upset with him, I still loved him, and that there wasn't anything that could take my love for him away. And so I had to then rethink, was I being supportive enough in terms of reassuring him that I love him, even in the moments when I might not be happy with his behavior? If that's reasonable.
So honest of you.
Yeah, I think Mr. Rogers said
reveal
something
to
like,
us what they need, but we're not paying attention.
Yeah. I think Mr. Rogers said something to the effect of, we have to be loved in order to love ourselves first. And that's, I think, what kids really need is to kind of feel that security of our love for them. And then they can love themselves and respect themselves and have a sense of dignity and develop from there. The next question I had for you was, you were talking about when you're talking to your spouse, I forgot exactly how you phrased it, but it's like, knowing yourself enough and knowing what you want to have that conversation and making sure you guys are on the same plane, on the same level, and going in the same direction with the same goals. I feel though a lot of our society now is so, it gets people focused on like instant gratification in so many different ways that people don't even explore themselves enough to know what they really want. Do you have any advice for people trying to identify like really what their goals or their direction is so they can have a more meaningful conversation with their spouse about that kind of thing?
Yeah, I do. The first thing that comes to mind is that, we are in a fast-paced society. We live in a technologically advanced world where we're distracted moment to moment to moment. And a lot of it is catch up. We feel like we got to catch up on the news. We got to catch up on our little hobby that we're focused on, or our fantasy football, or whatever it happens to be, or the weather, or even a conversation with one of our buddies. And this competitiveness for our time and attention is destructive to relationships, destructive to family dynamics. you probably all know or have heard plenty of stories about family members texting each other at home from room to room, or even in the same room, even in the same room.
Is there a problem with that?
I've never.
And so this is just the reality of how we live today, and to try to battle against that. And so the first thing that has to happen is we need to become slowed down in our thinking, and to be able to sit in quiet or solitude by yourself and say, is this the relationship that I want? And how am I truly feeling about the things that are going on in it? And to what degree am I responsible for any of it? And I have to be clear about that before I can have a conversation with my partner. I have to know how I've contributed, because my first reaction early on, as we talked about previously, and as I've written about in my book, was that it was her fault and that she was to blame for our problems, that I was doing everything perfectly well.
It's the hardest thing to get my spouse to realize that I'm always right, but
yeah. And so I remember I just saw something where a couple goes to couples therapy, and the guy comes in and he says, "Hey, I can help you fix my wife." and so the reality is that despite what I might have believed initially, I was to blame in so many ways, and I didn't see it, and I couldn't have saw it at that moment. I couldn't have seen it at that moment. And to self-reflect, right, to be able to shine the spotlight of truth on ourselves is not an easy thing to do. But it is a work in progress, just like everything else in life. We're just works in progress, and we get a little wiser over time, but you don't become a wise person without lots of mistakes and errors, and to allow those to occur, but to vow kind of internally to yourself to not make them anymore. But you ultimately have to make a decision. What do I want to experience with this person? And what am I willing to do in order to have that? And that's a very, very much an individual choice.
That's interesting, because we have to be humble in order to really kind of self-reflect, and then figure out what we want, and kind of realize if we're preventing it from happening too, and improving. This has been great.
I'm always the obstacle in my own way.
Yeah. This has been great. Jeff, I want you on another 10 times. This is wonderful.
Yeah, that's right, Jeff.
Listen, I'm happy to do them. I enjoy these conversations. My perspective is that there's not enough of this out there. From what I've seen myself, lots of it is less meaningful. Lots of superficial things and what appears to be surface things to do, but deeper thought is required if you want anything meaningful or special with a significant other in your life. You really have to slow down and eliminate to the best degree possible the distractions of focus that take you out of a mindset that's going to lead to, blissfulness together. And ultimately, I believe that's possible for any couple. At some point, a conversation would be, I think, great. And I don't know if this is your audience or not, but there needs to be some level of understanding about how important that decision is to bring somebody into your life. And from my perspective, it's the most important decision you can ever make. Who am I going to share my life with? What are the criteria that I'm going to evaluate this person based on? How am I actually ready for that? What do I really want? There's lots of dynamics to go into that, but that's certainly the most important decision in relationship success. Did I marry the right person? How do I know? Or was it me that was the problem?
Yeah.
And it's usually the latter. It's usually me. Right? I mean, really, it's always, I'm the one that can look in the mirror and say, oh my gosh, I need to do a few things differently. It's very humbling, isn't it? I think it's the great self-improvement process is marriage.
I don't think any place is better for self-improvement than a relationship if you allow that to be. You have to be a willing participant, though. Not
That's
a,
right.
That's right.
I might have been a reluctant
Well
participant
said,
early on.
Yeah.
Necessity
we
out
love
of
you, Jeff Forte.
necessity. And then
Mhm.
but then ultimately it became, oh man, this can go someplace. When you see the light, when you see the daylight, it becomes easier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good.
Wow, Jeff, this has been awesome.
Thanks, my friend.
You've been very generous with
Yep.
your time. We're
Yes.
so grateful.
Bless you,
Thanks for
Jeff.
Happy to do it. It's always great seeing you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a few minutes to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. When you hit the like button and leave a comment, your feedback helps us improve the show. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and connect with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and on Facebook at Stronger Marriage. Be sure to share with us what topics you want us to explore or what you loved about today's episode. If you want even more resources to improve your relationship connection, visit our website at strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producers Rex Polanis and Alexis Alcott and the team at Utah State University. And you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission